Hi, Guy.
Hey, Kathy.
I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm excited to get to know a little bit more about something that you shared with the community this week. And it was a story that really, really touched me.
Mm,
You shared how when you were young, when you were a small kid, you had multiple learning disabilities,
mhm,
and that you were kind of on this path of being a little bit dropped by education because you were like not on the same reading level as everybody, and it was pretty significant.
mhm,
um, and then you had a teacher that came and plucked you out of a classroom named Mrs. Brutches, and she had a huge impact on the trajectory of your life.
mhm,
And I'd love to hear you share some of that story
mm.
with me and with whoever's listening.
I'd love to. I'd love to. I have to say that actually in writing it, which is oftentimes the experience I have with writing, is that I actually find out what I actually think once I write it. Um, and and in writing that down, I actually was quite moved by my own story of what
Yeah.
happened, because as I was writing, I was realizing, God, to what degree she continues to live for me and has an
Mm.
impact in my life in almost every conversation that I have, and in almost everything that I do that I really call good. Um, and also,
Mm.
I've been so fortunate. I've had so many people in my life that have done very, very similar things. So I felt moved along with you.
Mm.
And it's so interesting to see how in a certain way how deep it's gotten in how deep in me the way that Mrs. Brutches was with me has gotten in so deep with me, such that I still am discovering, right, what she taught me.
Mm.
um and so that's it's just such it's such a rich experience with her.
Mhm.
The So as a kid, I had I wrote about, I had like multiple learning disabilities. I don't even know if they had back then, if they had dyslexia. But I hear things backwards still. I'm kind of
I can attest to that.
and I just and I was very, very imaginative. I would like, I would just be in fantasy world all the time. I was an only child. And my parents are amazing people, and they suffered from addiction, and a lot of the things that went along with that I experienced. And so there was a bunch of probably different reasons that things were going on, probably biological and environmental kinds of things. But
Mm.
the result was, I'd go to school and I was well behaved. I just really wasn't quite there. And all the teachers really liked me. I mean, everyone really liked me and stuff, but um, they couldn't teach me how to read. And it was so frustrating, I think, for everybody. And I remember my parents would hire tutors. I would go to special like reading classes. I would even move to different schools and move around from school to school, and no one could quite crack the code. Um,
Can I ask you a question about that? So everybody was frustrated. They were trying really hard. You were being moved from school to school, getting tutors. But do you remember feeling a sense of frustration, or like what was your take on it?
oh my God, it was so awful.
Oh.
I just remember I would have homework, okay, and my grandparents would pick me up from school, and my grandpa's German, and I don't even know if he knows how to read. Grandma did all the books and stuff like that. He was a talker, but I don't think he was very educated. So it wasn't like anyone was much of a help. But I'd have all this homework, and I was in third grade, and I remember distinctively looking at the homework and not being able to do it and feeling so frustrated that I literally would like hit myself in the head. Like I would pull my
Oh.
hair. I would like literally feel so frustrated and overwhelmed
Mm.
that it was intense. You know, it was really, really intense for me. I would experience like despair and like overwhelm and all kinds of
Oh.
crazy stuff. The only thing that I remember that came really easily to me was with the arts. I mean, I drew a lot and I painted and I sculpted and I was always excelled in those kinds of things that involved the imagination. But when it became
Mm.
math and reading, it wasn't.
It must have been so relieving for you to be in those, like in more creative realms and feeling like, oh, I actually can, this flows for me.
Totally. I loved my fantasy world way more than I loved the world. In my fantasy world, no one gave me homework. Like,
Oh.
and then I was held back a year or two or something like that, and they tried to mainstream me back into like the regular public school. And I remember I think it was in the fourth or fifth grade. I think it was maybe fourth grade. At that point, I think it was in fourth grade, and I was like had a first grade reading level. And
Wow.
then one day, I don't think anybody told me about this. One day, this older woman walks into my regular class, and I hear her call my name, and she's like, "Come here." And she's this kind of old lady, really sweet, and she was so nonchalant. She was so matter of fact, as if as if we'd known each other all our lives, right? And I
Mm.
remember feeling that feeling with her the moment I saw her. There was a way that she just attuned to me, approached me,
Mm.
called my name. It was like, oh, okay. So I just went with her down the hallway, and we walked into this room that I'd passed by a number of times. I never knew what it was. We walk in, and there's this like room filled with like colorful pictures everywhere, and these blocks, and all kinds of carpeting, different color carpeting and stuff. And what I recall was I went in there the first time, and I don't remember talking, ever really talking. I really don't remember talking much ever with her about school or grades or all those things that would just make me go bye bye whenever it was so long,
Yeah.
so impossible. She just, it seemed like when I looking back, what it seemed like that she did is we just sat down and she just would start to notice where my attention went, and
Mm.
and and somehow would just follow where my interest was and would meet me there. And then 2 hours would have gone by, and then it was time to go back to class. And then the next day she came, picked me up, went to her room, and then we just end up doing these elaborate projects, and I'd be painting things, and
Mm.
but don't ever recall explicitly I don't ever recall explicitly ever talking about school or about any
Do
of
you,
this.
and do you remember do you remember what it was like for you? Like, was there a point where you're like, oh, I really love this woman, or I really like this time, or like you started to notice looking forward to it, or
Yeah, it was one of the first times that I recall. See, I would have a particular feeling with her that was pretty instant. And it
mm,
was this feeling that it was like it was a world, you could say, the world with Mrs. Brutches. And it was a real special world, but it was also a real familiar world to me in the sense that it was the world that I would experience mostly by myself.
yeah.
And being an only child and like growing up in a neighborhood where like there weren't a whole lot of kids and stuff like that, I would spend so much time alone. And and everything when I was a kid was like everything was a who. It was almost like the world was a who. You know, things
Mm.
weren't things in time and space. They were animated creatures. Every tree spoke to me in the walls and the ceiling. And oh, my light just went out. This is so. Hang on 1 second. The let me turn this back on. Let's see. There it is. There we go.
There you go.
There we go. That's really strange. Okay, I'll stay on there. So the that there was a magicalness to my world alone that in with her was the first time anybody I walked with anybody else in that world.
Mm.
And looking back, and I think that's really what it was like, is that she actually had this way of listening, a way of tuning into me and paying attention to me that was like drew out what was right and true about the way I saw, I think.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I never got the sense that she was doing anything in particular. I never got the sense of like that she was like had a perspective that she was applying, or that she was, doing some method with me. She just
Mhm.
simply loved me. And I
Mhm.
had really come to see that, like, what loved me in a particular way, because there's nothing like being loved in such a way that, like, the medium of that love is one's attention, the way someone pays attention to you, the way someone listens to you, the way someone sees you and receives you, right? I think that's
Mhm.
that depth of love had me, I think it showed her how I saw the world.
Mm. I'm smiling so much right now because that's exactly what I feel in your gaze. Like that's what I see you give people over and over again. That's exactly it, the way you just described it. It's so, yeah, it has me smiling.
It has me smiling too. Thank you. That's about the biggest. That's about the best thing that you could ever tell me, actually.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so clear to me. That's the thing that's really stood out for me about you from the moment I met you.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so there's more to say about that, but I also am really curious about what you said about how you had already like felt this magical, creative, fantasy, interesting experience being alone. And how was it for you? Like now you had that in somebody's, like somebody witnessing or gazing or loving you in that. How did that change your experience in it? Like
Mm-hmm.
having her be there. What was that like? Do you remember?
Well, I think we can probably get at it by saying that, like, well, what ended up happening is
Okay.
is I'd say about 3 months later. And to lay a little bit of groundwork for the story, and I think a lot of people will relate with this. Every Friday in my regular classroom, the teacher would had a stack of graded papers from that week.
Oh gosh.
I remember, like, picking up those papers was this thing that I could barely even, like, yeah, I could barely even be. It was so ominous because I just knew
Ugh.
nothing good was in there. And one Friday, and I pick up my scrap of paper and I put it in my bag, and I do the ritual where I go get off my bus and I go home, and then, like, I go inside, and then I make sure that my mom's not around, and then I take the papers and I put it on put it on, like, the kitchen counter or something, and I zoom off into the room before anyone.
Oh my God, I can totally picture it.
Because it's like it never was good news. It was always, bad news. It was bad. It was also the kind of bad news that, like, just I felt so bad about myself about, and
Oh,
hopelessness and stuff that would happen, and
yeah.
and so I that particular day I did that same ritual I did every Friday, and I go to my room, and then a few minutes later, all of a sudden, I hear these kind of exasperated, like, aghast, like, wondrous, like, spell struck, noise that's coming out of my mom's mouth downstairs. And
Oh my gosh.
I immediately think to myself, because I was always getting in trouble for something, right? In some way, and so I was like, okay, what did I do now? I couldn't remember doing anything, but I was probably did something. And so I hear she calls me, and I go downstairs, and she has, like, tears of wonder coming down her face, and
Oh.
in disbelief, and she's like picking up the papers and she's showing me, and each one has like, B's and C's and like almost every single paper. And I'm
Oh.
looking at that and I have no reference point for this kind of experience. And she's like, what happened? And I was like, I have no idea. And it, what I came to realize was that I started to read.
Oh.
Like I started to read, and it's striking to me, and it seems so relevant that I didn't notice it,
Oh.
right? Like I didn't notice it. And I think that had everything to do with not what Mrs. Brutches was saying to me or how she was guiding me. It was more like how she was able to see how I made sense of the world, which I think we all make sense of the world very uniquely. And I think mine was like so outside of the range of the normal for whatever reason that no one could put things in a way that like I could actually comprehend by the way I made sense of the world. And it felt like that she went back there and she just like accompanied me and got familiar with that, and then probably just had me read. But to me, I wasn't reading. I was being, right?
Oh.
I wasn't doing anything. And I would imagine if it was super explicit that we were going to learn how to read, man, I think all of the things that just disinhibits one's brain from something.
Yeah. Like by that point, I imagine you had so many blocks in place to actually, making the connections from the words on the page to making meaning in your brain, in your nervous system. And that somehow she helped in meeting you there, something relaxed. And it was kind of like a sideways way of getting in that wasn't so like head on, that opened up your seeing and like the connection between
Totally.
the words and the meaning and how it all processed in your nervous system.
Yeah.
That's
And
remarkable.
isn't it amazing? She was wonderful.
Yeah.
And so I worked with her for, I think for like a year, maybe a couple of years or something like that. And by the time I was in 6th grade, and I think starting in 4th grade, I was like at a 1st grade reading level. By the time I think I graduated grade school, 6th grade, I think I was scoring above 6th grade reading comprehension.
That's amazing.
And what's interesting about it is I realized I keep learning about how I read through the years, right? Because I realized like I actually don't read the way that I think a lot of people read.
I think I've noticed that about you. Because it's like I notice as you read, you read a lot more slowly than like I would read something. And it's like as you're taking in the words, or like you're saying the words out loud, I imagine you're like actually making meaning, like it's integrating into you somehow. It's like it's not separate from you. That's how it feels when I'm in the presence of you reading. Does that make sense?
Totally. It's a total absorption. And
Yes.
the way I've made sense of this, I don't know if this is accurate, but the way that I've made sense of it is that she taught me how to read with my right brain, right? Which the right brain is more holistic. It grasps larger conceptual perceptions. It's like, it's the integrative kind of functioning of your experience. And through the years, I don't actually, if you ask me to read out loud, I'm not good at reading out loud. I'm not good at pronunciating the words or like even knowing what each sentence means. But there's more of a sense of like when I read a paragraph, I kind of get a shape or a sense of the whole. Mm-hmm. And so there is this way in which, and I remember precisely when I kind of discovered this, because I have my girlfriend, Brianne, who's got an IQ that's like, she's super
off the charts.
And she's like really specific and has an amazing memory. And one of the things I love about her is that she'll let me read Heidegger to her,
Oh,
intense philosophy books and stuff that are dear to me. And I remember one time reading Heidegger, I was reading it and we went Heidegger makes up language, right? Because he thinks so deeply. There's no words for the thoughts that he has. So he would have to make up weird German language. And we went through some long German word or something, and I couldn't quite pronounce it. And she's like, hey, and I couldn't pronounce it. I just went on. She's like, hey, go back to that. What is that word? And I'm like, I come back. I still couldn't pronounce it. And I was like, whatever. And I just kept moving on. She said, no, hey, read that word. And I'm like, I don't know what the word is, but like, and I just say like, look, it's going to be clear, 3 or 4 like pages down what that word. And all of a sudden I was like, whoa, there's a difference here. I don't read the same way that you do. And I really got that sense of like, I was like, and that's when I really appreciated Mrs. Brutches in the sense that there was it's the whole to the part, right? Not the part to the whole for me. And that also answered the question when I started to teach circling to people. So for me, when I read now, it is an experience. So like almost like when I'm reading a philosophy book, I'm going through an experience. I feel it in my body. It's like an idea clicks, and then all of a sudden I start like flashing to all other frames of my life, and everything looks different, and it becomes more and more interesting. It's like a whole relationship almost. And I'm thinking like, so you could say that my life on some regards, especially in trying to figure out how to look at circling in an explicit way to be able to teach it, which has been a ride to do. And it's still, I'm still investigating that, as you understand. I would give my life in so many regards were defined by these authors that I would discover that would change my whole way of understanding things. Right. And so, so when I started to teach, I'd be like, all right, I'm going to start having them read this book. And I would, I'd introduce it to them, and then I'd give it to my class for homework. And I'm thinking like, I can't wait. They're going to have the same experience as I did. And, oh no, man! They'd come back and they would just be like, "What are you doing to us?" Right?
Yeah.
And so there's a way that like I think really the point of that is a deeper message that in the reason why I really wanted to share that story is I think Mrs. Brutches and a number of people in my life that have been mentors for me in that way, or have touched me in that way, that are like angels for me. Like they've come into my life. And I've thought a lot about this, and I continue to think a lot about this, about like, well, what exactly did these, because my life does feel very, very defined in so many regards by these angels that come into my life, and they just take me underneath their wing for a period of time. And I can't remember a lot of what they said. I mean, they said a lot of stuff to me. We would go into like deep conversations about things. That's not what I recall. What I actually experienced, I think what that they gave me they didn't say stuff to me. It was the way that they listened to me. It was like as if for that period of time when I was with them, I kind of lived in their gaze, and inside of their gaze, it kind of potentiated things in me and turned light switches on in me that were never actualized before, that were just pure potential. And so when I think about Mrs. Brutches, and when I think about Greg Beatty, and when I think about Steve, and all these different people that have just taken me underneath their wings when I was younger, I have a sense of like literally feeling as if the quality of their attention kind of ripened me into existence in a certain degree.
Do you think that it was both the listening, but also I get the sense that it was a seeing something in you, like listening to what's really happening in your world, but also really seeing like a potential, or seeing something outside of the context of what other people were seeing.
Totally.
I've had you become more of that in their gaze.
And I think about what what that seeing was it was in a very like an attunedness to their attention and their gaze. And I think each of them, it was as if like being with them, there was this background knowingness that they emanated with me in a lot of respects, where they saw, it's almost like they were listening to whatever was unique in me, right? And then they would say it, and they'd see it, and then they would point to it or reference it or just know it. Mm-hmm. And then we would have conversations and spend time together. And this, whatever it was that they saw in me, would start to come into articulation, would start to become part of the conversation, both explicitly and implicitly. Mm-hmm. And this is where I've just really, I think, experientially learned what the hell we mean when we say someone is deeply, deeply valuable to us. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, when they ask themselves that question, or when they think about being a valuable person, I think what they probably think is like, they probably think of somebody kind of in action, or somebody who says really cool stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that kind of gets in the way of something that's even more primordial, or even a preliminary to all of that, which is the depth of one's attention, the quality, the way that one receives the world and hosts the world and others in the world that have a ripening quality to it.
Yeah.
And I think about, yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it also, what occurs to me in that type of listening is there's like an infinite openness that allows like more listening to occur, like whatever is becoming in the relationship or in the gaze, as opposed to if I was seeing you in a certain way or making some sort of just putting you in some kind of box, like this is who he is, then you've all of a sudden limited what you can hear or what you're available to. So there's like an infinite amount of openness in the listening, and an infinite amount of willingness to like stand on this precipice of not knowing what's going to become.
Totally. And there's this, and I would say that, really, we can talk about it as listening, we can talk about it as attention, we can talk about it as seeing. But I think more primarily, what we're really talking about is the way that you truly love someone.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that like is no doubt, like these people loved me, right? And their way of loving me, right, was the way in which they beheld me, in their gaze, in their attention. And that everything that they did, of course, because they loved me, there was an attunement into finding out who I was. But already prior to like finding out who I was, presupposes a kind of deep respect for that I was, right? And that I was a unique person, that they came with, that's the quality of openness that they came to me with, right? There was a learning and a holding of who I was. And those people just turned my life around, right? They really just turned my life around, and ended up defining, because that's what I do now. I was writing the thing about Mrs. Brutches, I realized, like, wait a minute, this is what I do for a living, is to awaken that depth of love and the capacity to see and listen as deeply as someone like Mrs. Brutches listened to me. And my whole life has been about like helping other people awaken that quality of love in their heart and be able to like impact other people around them. Like that's and when people allow me to touch them like that, it's like the experience is like one, it's the best way that you could love me, right? is to
Yeah.
is to receive, to receive is to receive that from me.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous, wonderful thing.
Oh my gosh, it is. And it's generous, like the attention is generous, but it's actually equally nourishing to be the one giving the attention and gaze and love in such a deep, profound way, and to have somebody receive it. It's equally loving or nourishing.
I think it's the best kept secret.
I do too.
I do. I think it's the best kept secret. There is nothing like being with another human being and finding out how they see the world, how they make sense of things. It's like keeping company with somebody, and it's not, because on some level, you know, we're all connected to everything else. Like we all come from a culture, and that culture is rooted in a biology, and that biology is rooted in the physics, and that, you know, on some level, listening to you, you're connected all the way back to the Big Bang. You know, what's really cool though is that in listening to you, you actually have a mouth, so you can talk about it. And so there's a quality and a depth of listening and seeing that you can bring to each conversation, which you can actually start to begin to hear not only what someone says, but who they are. And not only who they are, but the network of relations and the mystery of being that even has them be there itself. You can start to actually hear those kinds of things as the listener, as the receiver of that, right? Like I definitely am contributing to you, but boy, I tell you what, like I am getting as much out of it, if not more than you are, because it's a nourishing thing to sit in front of a human being in their uniqueness and see them. Like,
Absolutely. So I imagine if I'm somebody watching this conversation, like my mind would go to, well, how do you teach me to do that? Like that sounds good, but man, I've got so much shit going on in my life, and I want to be that way, but like how do you help me with that? How do you help people to do that?
Well, that's all I do.
But how?
I'll say a couple of things. It's like, you know, there are hows to do it. There's skills to learn, and there's techniques and principles and all that kind of stuff. And all that stuff's really, really important. But I think the thing that I would have to say is that how you do it is you do it with your whole being. It's the only way you can do it. It's with your whole being, right? Your whole being. And really, that's the one thing that I can't do for anybody is to give anybody the experience of their whole being, right, being involved in something. But the courses that we do, especially the one that we're doing this weekend, the Explorer weekend, is all about that part of circling that is all about that kind of primordial attunement that Mrs. Brutch has had with me, and all the things that we've been talking about, that kind of deep, deep sense of listening with your whole body, being open to be deeply moved by someone, to listen in such a way that like you're so nourished and inspired, like through listening to them, that it actually shifts both of you in a deep way. And so what we do in the course is it's really a self revelation. Like the learning on how to hear you is really a revelation in hearing myself.
It's so funny. It reminds me. So a lot of people will come to circling, you know, thinking that they're coming to be circled, and like what ends up happening in the process is shifting from that to this experience of being deeply nourished in being the one that's listening, and the one that's being impacted, and the one that's giving attention. It's wonderful to see that shift in folks.
Yeah, totally.
Like that is the secret. That is the secret.
Because listening is this is the silent is the silent shaper of the speaker. It's the invisible one that shapes all speaking, and that's something that people I don't think about often, because usually when they think about communication, they think about speaking and saying the right thing, and all that's important, but all speech presupposes a listening. And if you think about it, the space of listening versus the space of speaking is a very different space. Speech, you say one word at a time, one sentence at a time. But I can listen. Listening is holographic, right? I can listen. I can listen with many categories. I can educate my listening such that I can actually hear, like I can hear more of what you have to say, and I can even hear more of what you don't even know that you're saying, right? And I can also hear who's saying it. And so like even like right now, the way I'm speaking is really being generated by your listening. Like if
I like how I listen.
I love how
So, like, I guess in conclusion, I know I feel extremely deep gratitude for Miss Brutches. And I'm really present to the kind of full circle of how that's what I experience you and, those who are, have been circling for a while. I experience you so directly the same way you described Miss Brutches. Yeah.
Wow, that's really great. That's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for the conversation.
You bet you.
Yeah.
I love you, Kathy.
Love you too, Guy. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.